All right, welcome back. You made it to the second week. Congratulations. I hope you all had a chance to get all your materials, your book, and scanner or digital camera, a sketch pad, some things like that. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 1, the first half of Chapter 1 a little bit, which is a reading assignment for this week. And I also want to talk a little bit about what you read last week, sort of the introduction and the preface. And then we'll get into kind of form and space and talk about your assignment. Graphic designers are artists. The difference between graphic design and fine art is that design serves a purpose. Art can be there just to be art. Doesn't have to mean anything. It can be totally up to the viewer what it means to them. Graphic design is actually trying to convey some sort of message as clearly and concisely as possible. Design serves a purpose. It communicates something. Whether you're selling something or you're trying to support a cause, whatever it is, a band that you like, whatever that may be, you're trying to communicate something. And it's sort of similar to like an architect or a landscape designer or interior designer, where you need all these elements to work together to form a whole. You need harmony and balance and all this kind of stuff. The only difference is we're working, for the most part, on a two-dimensional plane, whereas they might be working in a three-dimensional space. But it's the same kind of thing. Design goes through so many cycles, and these days we're overwhelmed. Everywhere you look, whether you're in the grocery store or at the mall or driving in the car or at work, on the internet, whatever it may be, you're just bombarded by all these images, all graphic design is all around us. So much so that people kind of take it for granted, which is why we have to constantly change our strategies to get people's attention and kind of make what we want to stand out. But aside from that, the fundamentals remain the same. Always have, always will. It's just the strategies that people use to implement those are a little different. But anyway, going through the book, it talked about that. And then the 20 rules of good design are really helpful, I think. Anytime you get stuck on a project in the future, it might help to look back at these, and it'll give you a little inspiration. A few of them that definitely stuck out for me: have a concept, the very first one. That's important. So many people, because of computers, they think they can make it look flashy and smooth and fancy and everything, but if you don't have a strong concept behind it, it's basically just a shiny piece of crap. We talked about that. It's number 2, communicate, don't decorate. It's the same kind of thing. You can use all these elements, but you really want to get your point across relatively minimally, like using as little as you can to get your point across in the strongest way. Speak with one visual voice. Use 1 or 2 typeface families maximum. Just because it's really easy for us to put 300 fonts on one design doesn't mean that's going to work. What else? If you can do it with less, then do it. I love that. Less is more. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit today with negative space and positive space and the interaction between them. That goes on to number 8. Negative space is very helpful to you. If you have, and I'm always trying to teach my clients this, as well as my students, that less really is more, and instead of cramming as much as you can onto a page, like, oh, let's put all this text in here, it's not going to be nearly as effective than if you have an image and 1 line of type or something like that, just because the emphasis really goes to those objects, as opposed to if there's everything on the page, then people are just looking around, they don't know where to look, and that's your job, is to kind of lead the viewer. Whether subconsciously or consciously, usually subconsciously. You know these things, the viewer might not, so their eyes go where you want them to go if you know the rules and you do it right. Measure with your eyes. Design is visual. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. How the viewer perceives something. If you measure it just because something is in the middle, it's 10 inches on this side, 10 inches on this side, doesn't mean that it's going to look that way. If there's a bunch of other stuff going on in the background, you kind of have to judge with your eyes what's going to, what really looks centered as opposed to what physically is centered. I don't know if that makes sense. You'll understand. Look at history, don't repeat it. That's good, that's important. You don't want to do any kind of copyright infringement or anything like that. One thing, it says create images, don't scavenge. That's good if you have the time, but realistically, a lot of times we're under deadlines, and sometimes you gotta scavenge and get what you can. I do that quite a bit, I guess. Maybe that's why I don't think it's that important. It says symmetry is the ultimate devil, number 20. That is key. If everything's centered, then it's just going to be boring because everybody's seen that. It's the first thing we do. So anyway, I just wanted to do a real quick overview of that. I don't want to spend too much time on this. But the next chapter starts talking about form and space and kind of the basic bare bones elements of design. Form is basically objects that make up design, whether that's images or words, text, shapes, lines, dots, all that kind of stuff is an element of form. Okay, and all forms have meaning that we associate with them, and you need to be conscious of that if you want to, get your message across as efficiently as possible. You need to be aware of that. Like a circle, for instance, people see that and they automatically think is sun, moon, ball, wheel, whatever. And then there are also deeper psychological things, like a circle kind of represents infinite, because it keeps on going, it's continuous. A square is pretty neutral and pretty solid and static, not real dynamic, unless it's on its side. That's a whole other thing. We'll get into that. I don't want to go too fast. And I am moving kind of fast just because, you don't have to sit here and watch, half an hour of me talking to my computer. And I don't want to talk to my computer for half an hour, honestly. But this is a video, so you can go back and watch it as many times. You can take notes. If you didn't catch something, just rewind it. So it's pretty good format that way. So a designer, we use form, all these different things. We bring them together to create something that is greater. The sum of its parts, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So basically, we bring all these things together, these images and text and things, and we display them in such a way that they really come together to form a cohesive whole unit. And that's, if you do that correctly, it can be a really powerful thing. And it needs to be resolved. That's what the book refers to it as. I think that's a good word for it. Basically, where it doesn't look thrown together. It looks like you've thought about where everything goes and everything has fit together. It's like putting a puzzle together almost, except there's no right answer. It can be frustrating sometimes. So that's form. Space is where you put forms, basically. That is your piece of paper or your computer screen, your TV screen. In this case, in the context that we're talking about, it's generally going to be a two-dimensional space. Even though you might have the illusion of three-dimensionality, it's usually going to be two-dimensional in graphic design. Now, that's not always the case. If you're doing packaging design or environmental design, things like that, then you get into a three-dimensional plane, and that's a whole other ball of wax. So we're not going to touch on that too much. We're basically going to focus on 2D. But the space gives you an area in which you work in. You have to consider that. You have to think about the space because that affects the form. For instance, let's say I have a piece of paper. All right? When I hold it like this, it kind of gives one sense, where if I hold it like this, it gives you another sense, and if I hold it to the side, something else completely. So you have to be conscious of that. For instance, a square shape, and you can relate this to brochures or billboards or magazines, whatever you want to. A square shape is pretty neutral, generally. All the sides are the same. There's not really a whole lot of push-pull going on. A horizontal shape would be kind of more passive. You think it. Look at the root word horizon. It kind of is. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, it's a little more passive. Where if you hold it up this way, it might be a little more aggressive. And the book talks about that a little bit more. But you just basically need to be conscious of the space when you're thinking about the form. That's always the first thing. What's the format going to be? Is it going to be horizontal? Is it going to be vertical? Is it going to be some kind of weird organic shape, geometric shape? And that'll kind of help you get started.